A lot of us have been anticipating the Silk Road trial since October 2013 when Ross Ulbricht was arrested. So a bunch of us decided to organize and do a demonstration outside on the first day of the trial, which began January 13th. And that's what we did. I'll give shout outs down below. We brought signs and we made videos, and we wanted to really raise the understanding about how important this trial is. If you're unaware of why the Silk Road trial was important or why we were there, what we were doing, just watch the video I've linked below. I've also linked it at the end of this video. Day 1. We show up with our signs, things like 30 years to life in prison for an honest website and say no to violence, take the Silk Road. A few of us are also sitting inside of the courtroom, which it's an open public case, so you can just sit and listen. Most of the day was taken up by jury selection. So they had 90 possible jurors to go through, and they get a couple of both the prosecution and the defense get a couple of no's. So as the potential juror comes up and gives information about themselves, and these are all pre-selected with a questionnaire as well, then either the prosecution or the defense can null them, and each one only gets a couple of chances, and you have to use it in the moment. The judge rushed this process. One of the things that she would ask the jurors was, did you see a sign outside or did you get a pamphlet? Now, what she's talking about is, of course, our demonstration, and there was also a separate group of people who have been doing pamphleting about jury nullification throughout the month regarding all the cases that go on in a courthouse. And she was very worried that the jurors would be aware of their rights. So anyone who said yes, she would say, did you read the pamphlet? And if they said no, she'd say, well, put it aside and don't read it. Can you do that? Or if they saw a sign, she would obviously, take note of that. And it played into their chances of being selected. Now, the irony of this is, you don't want a biased jury. But when she would ask things like, will this in any way affect your bias for or against the government? Well, obviously, if you work for the government, or if your husband works for the government, or if you volunteer with the police force, or if your brother works for passport control, yes, it's going to affect your opinion in a biased way for the government. How is that even, blows my mind? So if they saw a sign that says something about, say no to violence, take the Silk Road, and that's not allowed, that's not acceptable, that creates a bias. But if you freaking work for the state, it's okay, because of course you can put that bias aside. Totally unfair and insane. So after the jury was selected, the kind of jury analyst actually said that it could have been much worse. Although a lot of them did work for the government, and a lot of the people seem to not have any children or be unmarried, which I kind of thought was not in our favor, because Ross is a young man, and if there's mothers on the jury, maybe they'd be more sympathetic. But overall, it looks to be a pretty decent jury. I'm not too worried about it. There was also quite a few African Americans on the jury, which I think is in our favor, because I'm sure most of them have been touched by the drug war. Everyone knows that, most people incarcerated are young black males for drug possession or dealing, etc. So then we start with the opening statements. Now, we actually got pushed out of the courtroom because it was right after lunch, and we had to sit in a room with, a screen that filmed what was happening, because all the people that worked in the courthouse, all the freaking feds, in their suits and their, highbrow mentality, they decided to come and rubberneck, filled up this room and also filled up the room that we were in, and they just listened to the prosecution, and then they left before the defense even said anything. So the prosecution makes their opening statement, and it's basically the iron fist of the state will not tolerate drugs or the sale of drugs. And this is, they opened it with, Silk Road is a terrifying deep web website that allows you to sell drugs to anybody, even children, and it's used by the Tor network, which allows people to be anonymous, and it's very scary. So they were trying to frighten the jury, and it was very theatrical, and he points at Ross and makes these grand gestures, and his voice and tone was just so accusatory and authoritarian, and it would have been chilling if it wasn't such a bloody show. So then we're sitting there and thinking, oh my God, how is this going to be turned around? And the defense goes up and he says, Ross Ulbricht is the creator of the Silk Road. People were shocked. And I was shocked that this is the angle they're coming from, but this is what I was saying all along. I didn't think that Ross did the website on his own. I think he did it with a bunch of people, and then because he was the nice and moral and honest one of the bunch, they decided to blame it all on him once they felt the breath of the state closing in on them. So that's how he opened up. But then he goes on to say, Ross Ulbricht created this Silk Road website as an economic experiment of free markets. And he quickly passed it on to other actors because it got too big and overwhelming for him and not something he signed up for. I was thrilled. I thought this just totally took the carpet from under the government's prosecution tactic. And everyone in the room was just bewildered and ecstatic at the same time. It was absolutely glorious. So shout out to Draytel, who is doing an amazing job so far, and that's the name of their lawyer. Another interesting thing is while I was in the courtroom, somebody told me that they overheard the justice say, the organizer of the protest is in the courtroom. I'm going to assume they were referring to me, not that I was the leader of anything really. I had a lot of help and it was a team effort, but I was the only person that was very public about what we were doing in the courtroom at that time. So it just goes to show that they are watching and they're not happy with us. Another clue to this was that after the jury was dismissed and the opening statements were done, the judge ended the day by saying, we have to speak about the people outside. Now, if this continues, I'm going to have to do an anonymous jury. The defense lawyer got up and said, yes, we don't know these people, and I hope that they discontinue this demonstration because we want the best for us and we want the best for this case. So although we're just expressing our freedom of speech and we had no interaction with the jury whatsoever, we were just outside on public grounds with signs, we really put some fear into them because the judge is really scared of them being informed of their rights and being informed of the importance of this case. So she was very strict about it. And an anonymous jury means that she's going to take them and isolate them in a location and guide them to and from the courthouse. Now, she says this is so that they don't receive any outside information, but really what it would do is scare the jury because this is a big, drug lord criminal case, and they would feel threatened. They wouldn't be told why they're being isolated. They would just feel threatened, like their life is in jeopardy and they're being protected or something. So we ceased the demonstration next day. She said, if there's anybody in the morning, with signs or anything like that, then I'll have to make the jury anonymous. So, we did what we needed to do. We got media attention. We got the word out there. And we really made them nervous, so success. But as I reiterated in the first video, no more signs, no more demonstration outside. Feel free to come and report and talk about the case and spread the information, but no signs or anything outside, please. We have to respect their wishes. not the wishes of the judge and the prosecution, but the wishes of the defense, because we want this to be a fair trial for Ross. And now that the defense has an upper hand, there's no reason to push it. Day 2 was really the least exciting. The prosecution started with their first witness. His name was Duranian, and he was a Homeland Security special agent, and he worked at O'Hare, and he noticed an influx of drugs being sent through the mail, so he began an investigation into that. The reason I say it was boring is that the prosecution just went through the whole website and how it works, and they did things like explain how a forum was used and how to use a forum for an hour. And I understand why they did it. They need to build a foundation of understanding for the jury and set up some other things like they're basically trying to say that Ross Ulbricht, if he is DPR, he was the mastermind and he had access to all the stuff and he was very active in the website with administration, etc. Now, the way that Duranian had all this information is that he took over a administration account called Cirrus. He participated in actually administrating the website and settling disputes between vendors and buyers, and they also were proving that these drugs sold online were actually drugs. So they spent 7,000 American dollars on ecstasy. They bought like 10,000 pills of ecstasy from Silk Road. So that's where your tax money is going to, guys. Another funny thing is that when they were explaining Bitcoin, they kept saying, you can take your US dollars, so real money, and turn it into these Bitcoins. And then you can take the Bitcoins and turn it back into real money. I thought that was pretty funny. They said that every single time in association with US dollars. So Duranian guided us through the way that they identified certain people on the Silk Road and how they got access and how that worked, and then how they ended up tracking down Ross. So what they wanted to do is they wanted to catch him red-handed with him being logged into the administration window and chatting with Cirrus in real time as they arrested him, so they could grab his computer and prove that he was online, logged in as DPR, etc. And that's what they did. He logged on and was speaking to Ross as Ross was in a public library in San Francisco. And then he, signaled his men, and they came and arrested him with his laptop open. So now we swung back, and everyone's like, how the heck are they going to defend that? The third day begins, and this day is completely insane. There were some really odd things about the whole scenario that the prosecution painted. First of all, DPR wasn't online for 2 whole days prior to Ross Ulbricht's arrest, which is very uncharacteristic of him. He was the administrator of the website. He ran it. There was so much to do, so much to negotiate and participate in. So that's a bit weird. And just from a common sense perspective, why would Ross Ulbricht, this mastermind behind Silk Road, go in a public place, have a BitTorrent client open, which makes your computer vulnerable to attack, and, log in as an administrator in the Silk Road and on public Wi-Fi? It is just ludicrous. It seems very constructed or set up. It just seems ludicrous to me that this mastermind drug lord who has so much to lose would be so ridiculously careless. They begin the cross-examination, and it turns out that Duranian was suspecting Kerpelis, the asshole behind Mt. Gox, of being DPR for 2 years. They only suspected and pursued Ross for just about a month, almost 2 months or something like that. 2 years. They were investigating Kerpelis. And an affidavit was read where they actually wanted to have a warrant for Kerpelis's Gmail so they can investigate it further. That's how heavily suspected he was. The defense started to talk about things like Karpeles owning silkroad.org, which was a guide how to get on Silk Road and what to do. And he owned the domain to that. And he also really fit the profile because he has all these other websites and servers all around the world, and that could easily have been used to host Silk Road. 2 of his Bitcoin addresses were associated with Silk Road. There was an interview that Andy Greenberg did a while ago that really fit Karpeles' character. He has loads of experience with e-commerce sites, is a self-proclaimed expert hacker, and Ashley Barr, his associate, was suspected of being his ghostwriter in all this because he's not very good with English. So then there was a second investigation into Karpeles because of Mt. Gox, and Duranian actually pleaded with them not to move forward because it might taint his investigation, but they did, and they seized $3 million of funds from Mt. Gox. At this point, Karpeles actually claimed to know who DPR was and wanted to give that information in exchange for some sort of plea bargain. Now, as soon as all of this started to be mentioned by the defense, the prosecution began to object. And although the defense has been objecting to quite a few things throughout the trial, like the way that text conversations were read, because they didn't want the jury to believe that these actually happened, they needed to be just read by the jury themselves to have the context of just being text. And those objections were overruled by the judge all throughout. Now the prosecution begins to panic and object to like anytime Karpeles is mentioned, and they had to actually dismiss the jury to have a conversation about this. And the jury was almost laughing. They were like smiling and finding it really amusing and really feeling the panic of the prosecution. I think they're enjoying the show, and I think there's some really good reasonable doubt being injected into their minds. And I quote some of the people in the courtroom after it was over. The prosecution was freaking out. So now someone has come forward and said that they have black and white proof that Karpeles made death threats on some of their employees. And that just goes to show you, where were all the people after Ross was arrested coming out and saying, oh, Ross is a terrible guy and he did this to me and he did that to me, or oh yeah, of course he's this kingpin mastermind and it totally fits his character and this is his history and I have this against him and I have that against him. But the first day with this new angle from the defense that Karpeles might be DPR, people are coming out and saying things that really fit the violent and egotistical nature of this guy. I'm really excited to see how the defense ends on this because they still have about an hour of cross-examination of Duranian. And I mean, I don't want to, sensationalize this, but it is sensational, not only because it's history and how it'll affect us, but it's been a show. I've been calling it a cabaret. It really has been. And twists and shocking revelations. Now, I'll leave you with a quote from the judge. It was one of the last things she said to the jury. Now, don't go home and watch The Princess Bride. I'll be doing another one of these videos next week. And if you find this information interesting or useful, throw me some coin or donate through PayPal. You can do that on my website, bravetheworld.com. New York is really, really expensive, but if you want to really, really help and throw some major coin towards the Ross Ulbricht cause, please go to freeross.org. They are having a $35,000 bill every week from their defense because that's just how much trials cost. So they're running low, and with the Bitcoin price down, it would really help if anybody with any extra money can throw some their way, and it would be so appreciated by the family. So go ahead and do that, and all the information is linked below. Thank you. The result of the Silk Road case will establish our internet freedoms. If Ross Ulbricht is convicted, then we are convicted. Convicted to a closed internet.